Okay, welcome back to another special Between the Pages book chat. We are here with an author that had to get a session rescheduled, and we're talking today with Jon Cronshaw, who's going to be discussing his Ravenglass Chronicles. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Cool. Yeah, great to be here. I'm Jon Cronshaw. I'm a English fantasy author. I've written several books in several genres. My latest genre that I want to stay doing is kind of epic high fantasy stuff. So I have done post-apocalyptic stuff in the past and game lit, but I'm a fantasy reader. This is what I love. I've just been full time as an author since 2017, so 5 years. And before that, I used to be a political reporter. So, the writing thing, I've done that all my adult life, really, professionally, in one way or another.
Well, I'm betting the politics stuff comes in handy with the epic fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid real world politics now. I've got a bad taste for it, but the fantasy, the kind of machinations. I think Uh, you just see like working in newspapers, especially. You get to meet a lot of different types of people. I've met like bishops and judges and politicians, and there's a lot of scheming, a lot of backstabbing. So yeah, that does come into it. Not particular people, but I suppose particular types of people in games and things that people play. Definitely featuring what I'm doing.
Okay, so tell us what the series is about. Give us an overview.
So, Ravenglass Chronicles. There we go. Can you see that? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the. It's basically a 22 novella epic fantasy series, and it goes from basically a princess coming of age, and it's basically her journey from becoming basically a bit of a whiny princess brat, typical princess brat, to being someone worthy of being an empress. Now, the reason it is 22 novellas is I had the crazy idea, and I don't know if you remember kind of prog rock in the 1970s and the idea of a concept album. So what I did is I wanted to do a series where it was based on the tarot's major arcana. So each of the episodes you've got goes from the magician all the way up to the world. So going through all the episodes, and what is it? It's the Fool is the prequel because the Fool card is zero, so I use that as my prequel novella thing. But yeah, so I use the what the cards mean to basically inform what the story was about, and it just so happened that it mapped really well to like a hero's journey kind of thing. So I was really pleased with that, and it took me a few years to write, and it's done really well. It's probably my most successful series, so that's cool. And yeah, that's that's pretty
Hmm.
much it.
Yeah, well, that's a cool concept for a book series. Did you have any troubles when you were using that like as a theme for the series?
I mean, sometimes there were points where it, there were things in the cards where I thought, okay, I've got to kind of use maybe like because in tarot reading you have your standard readings of cards, and then you have what's known as an inversion. So what this means is if a card comes out and it's upside down, then it's usually like an even more negative version of the card. So sometimes I had to kind of use the inverted version of the card in order for it to work with the story, because obviously I don't want everything to be happy, and there needs to be conflict, there needs to be um, things for my character to rail against. So yeah, sometimes I had to kind of uh, mess around with it a little bit, but for the most part, it does. The spirit is there, and the imagery and everything like that informs it. So yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the main character. What's she like?
As I say, Cat, Princess Catherine Osterhild, first in line to the Osterreich Empire. She is a oldest daughter, bratty princess. Um, she she's basically one of these people who, she's 16 going on 6. She's just like a kid, really kind of childish, playful, um, and she's just surrounded by this world of courtly life, and she just she's just very naive, and she has a magical awakening, and she is basically forced to grow up. She's forced out of her home. She's forced to go to another land and join this military organization called the Guardians. And it's saying what she's like. It is her coming of age story. It is going from being this naive character to someone who's quite fierce, someone who knows who she is and what she wants. And yeah, there's a lot of things going on in the background and manipulating her and who she's going to be. So yeah, there's just a lot going on with the character. I hope that it's a character that has like many layers, and isn't just a one-dimensional. Not just the bratty princess, but actually evolves and has different dimensions to her.
Okay, so is the series have a main antagonist, or is it more of a her against the world sort of vibe?
Um, it goes through, because it's such a long series. I had to go through basically a few different antagonists. In the first book, there's a the huntsmaster basically who runs the kennels, and one of the things that happens is she witnesses him killing a runt pup, and so he becomes an antagonist in the first bit of the book, and then as the series progresses, as I say, she goes to this military organization and there's someone there who's an antagonist. But overall, there is a antagonist who I don't want to give a kind of spoiler thing, but there is an antagonist running through the book who is manipulating her, pushing her, and by the end of the book, she realizes what's going on. So that becomes the main series antagonist.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about the world. What is it like? I'm assuming it's based on the medieval sort of a setting.
Yeah, so I've got a mix of kind of medieval. I suppose you call it like Northern Europe inspired. Um, I kind of came up with the idea for this series when I was in a place called Lindisfarne, Holy Island, which is it's on the northeast of England, very far north, almost border of Scotland, and this is like a tidally locked island. So sometimes you can get to it by a causeway, sometimes you can't. And there's a priory there, and it was where the Lindisfarne Gospel was made. It's where the pencil was invented. Like, this little place had so much history going on, and it's like a really evocative place. And it just that scene that inspired me, and I do have a place like that in my book. But then I've got other things going on that are more hallucinatory, let's say, um, which are kind of parallel worlds and other realms. And yeah, it kind of goes into that and what's real and what isn't at points. Um, so yeah, it's medieval fantasy with layers of other things going on, I would say.
Cool. So, what was the hardest scene or type of scene that you wrote in the series?
Oh, I mean, I think the hardest thing. Okay, I've got two things to say on this actually. The first one is um, there's a um, in one of the books, my main character, she gets enslaved by what is called a bound ship, and what this means is she becomes part of the hive mind of the ship, and so I had to write from the perspective of her as a passenger in her own head, as part of multiple perspectives on a ship, which was very weird. Um, but I think that was like the most poetic kind of stuff I've done. The other one is probably a bit harder to talk about, a bit more tragic. But this is, what was it? Um, in the tarot, you've got a card called the Hanged Man, and at the time I was writing this, my dad took his own life by hanging, and I mean that in terms of resistance, in terms of getting through that book, I mean, oh, that was just so hard to do. I can feel it in my voice now. But it was, yeah, that was just really, really tough. And because I had, what would you say, like, because I basically made a promise to the readers that I was doing this major arcana series, and I think the Hangman is card 15. It's quite far through. It's like I couldn't exactly stop there. So it was like yeah, that was the hardest one by far to write. Hardest thing I've ever had to do, and I hope I just don't have to do that again. So yeah.
Yeah, that could be quite difficult, and sympathy on your loss.
Mm, yeah.
Okay, so what are your characters afraid of?
Um, I think a theme that comes across, I've been told by readers in quite a few of my books, is the biggest fear being like a loss of autonomy, loss of control, loss of freedom, and I think this kind of happens in a lot of my books. Um, so yeah, it's almost like the mind being a place that is kind of sacred to the individual, and when that gets interfered with, when that gets manipulated, when I think it's almost like it's psychotherapy for me probably, writing this stuff. But the idea of the bound ship of being part of this hive mind, unable to control yourself, like that is very scary to me. And it was also like one of my main characters, Kat's biggest fear. She saw one of these bound ships, and it was like the most horrifying thing she ever saw, and then obviously became part of it later on. So yeah, I think it's that idea of just autonomy and yeah, individual freedom, that kind of thing.
Okay, so tell us about some of the secondary characters. Or do any of them stand out?
Yeah, I mean, there's Wits is one of my favourite characters to write in that series. Wits is a wyvern, so he's basically a small dragon who talks, and he I like to see him as kind of exhibiting uh, cat energy. So he's very kind of purry, very. I mean, he's one of these manipulative characters. He's Cat's best friend in the story, but he's also very sneaky, and yeah, there's a lot going on with that character. And he's very fun to write because um, in my world, wyverns are very long lived and compared to humans. So their kind of idea of time and time scale and events is very different, and they see things in a bit of a more of a round way, a bigger picture kind of thing. So yeah, really enjoy kind of writing that character. I've also got another wyvern character called Krieg who comes in later on, and I see him as almost like the same energy as a golden retriever. So he's just like, hey, I'm just happy to be here kind of character. So yeah, fun writing those people, definitely.
Okay, so which character would you like to hang out with in real life?
Ooh, there's a character in what is it? It'll be in. I think it's from the Chariot onwards, called Scram, and Scram is he's basically he turns out to be Cat's mentor. He teaches her about the ways of being a watcher in this group called the Guardians. Um, he Cat when she meets him thinks he's a dwarf, but he's really just someone who's stunted growth. But he's very good at fighting, and he's witty, he's funny, has a lot of jokes, a lot of banter kind of stuff. So yeah, I think he'd be fun to hang out with. Maybe not for too long because he does kind of get into fights and things like that. But I think just maybe a night at the pub, as long as it didn't go on too long, I think you'd be all right.
Okay, so you mentioned you've written in other genres, so can you tell us a little bit about them? And what genre would you like to write in that you haven't tried yet?
Um, so what is it? I've written um, my first series, which was the Wasteland series, is kind of post-apocalyptic, hopeful, heartfelt post-apocalyptic stuff. So that starts off with a book called Wizard of the Wasteland, and then I'm a fantasy reader, I'm a fantasy lover, so I went through all the kind of fantasy characters. I did Knight of the Wasteland, King of the Wasteland, Cleric of the Wasteland. Um, so these were following a single character called Abel, who is a recovering addict in this post-apocalyptic world. I suppose the nearest kind of thing you'd get to it is something like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, but obviously not as literary. I write more kind of fun stuff, or the Fallout video games, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, that was a story. I think just about hope, um, and finding hope in just the worst kind of situations. I also did a standalone one called Black Death Survival, which was a very gritty one set in Britain, that was basically my premise was the end of antibiotics, the return of the Black Death, and it was about real families trying to deal with that. And I ended up writing it in, I think it was 2018, but I didn't get to release it until the actual pandemic. So that was very weird, kind of writing, going through the edits of this book that was all about a pandemic, and it just felt like, oh, I didn't want to market it, I didn't want to talk about pandemics. So yeah, that was an interesting one. Also did a few books. Here we go. Oh, this is a game lit book. This is called Blind Gambit. So it's a bit like a Ready Player One type thing set in a virtual world. Now, the twist with this is my main character in the real world, he is blind. Now, I am severely vision impaired. I've got like 5% vision in the eye that works. The other one's just completely shot. So I wanted to write a realistic depiction of disability in a book. So that was more like my meditation on disability and what it's like to kind of deal with that. And recently, I mean, I wrote that, I think that was 2018, I want to say. That has recently been picked up by Disability Book Week as one of their like recommended young adult reads about disability. So that's really cool. That's like, I'm glad that is still, getting people interested and I suppose getting a real view of what it's like to live with a disability. Other genres, I mean, yeah, in the past I've dabbled with space opera. I love anything that's like speculative. I do want to write that stuff, but I also want to expand what I've got with this Ravenglass universe. So I've got my Ravenglass Chronicles, but I also did Dawn of Assassins, which is another one set in the same world. So there was basically an episode of the Ravenglass Chronicles, which was really dark, really gritty. I thought, I like this place, I like this location. I'm going to write more stories in that. So I've basically expanded the universe, and my next series is set a few hundred years before. So I'm trying to stick to that universe. And at the minute, any ideas that I get that I can't do in that universe, I'm just having to say, thank you, Muse, but no, give me something else, So it's just trying to stick with this thing and build up that Ravenglass universe brand, because I think in the future I would like to expand into like tabletop games and video games. I don't know, like just see it as intellectual property, a place where stories can be told rather than just individual books, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, when you do get there, Kickstarter is waiting for you. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of authors these days do side projects on Kickstarter to get them funded. It's very popular.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
Anyway, so I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Yeah, I mean, the best place really is to start. I've got a free starter library for my Ravenglass universe. So with this, you will get the prequel to the Ravenglass Chronicles called The Fool. You get a book called, it's a novel called Birth of Assassins, which is a prequel to my Dawn of Assassins series. There's also one called Blades of Wolfsbane, which is another novella, and this is the one that's set a few hundred years before. So I've written the prequel to that, and I'm just kind of writing the series to that. But you can get the starter library. Just go to joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. Start there. That's a good place. And what? Yeah, I'm on most platforms as Jon Cronshaw author. So TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. Uh, wherever the cool kids are nowadays, I'll try and get my stuff on there. It's Jon_author on the Twitter, and I do a weekly podcast which has been detailing my author journey. I think the time of recording this, I'm about 260 episodes in, so I've been doing this basically 5 years now, recording my weekly diaries. So that's just Jon Cronshaw's author diary. So you can get that Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hmm, cool. And you can find a link to his books in the description, so be sure to check them out. And I'd like to thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been good.
And join us tomorrow for another live Between the Pages book chat. And we'll see you then. So bye for now.
Take care, everyone.